Heretic's fork. The device was fastened around the wrist using a collar with two sets of metal prongs at either end, one under the chin and the other under the sternum. The victim had to keep their head up as a result, which caused them severe pain and lack of sleep. The victim would be interrogated or simply left in silence as the fork worked its way into their jaw and neck, extending until they were unable to raise their head. Scold's bridle. A metal framework with a sneeze to silence the wearer is worn on the head. The part inside the mouth has spikes that lacerate the tongue if the wearer moves. This was used to punish women who were thought to be bothering or gossiping excessively, humiliating them in public, and restrict their speech. Blood eagle. An awful ritual in which the victim's ribs were severed from the neck and stretched out to resemble wings, forcing the victim's lungs out through the cuts and resulting in a slow, painful death. Scaphism. Known as a very horrific method of murder, it required trapping a person in a boat, covering them with a mixture of milk and honey to draw insects, and feeding them the same mixture to make them repeatedly throw up and vomit, which would draw even more flies. The victim would be bitten by the insects repeatedly as they tried to enter his openings until he passed away. They would repeat this procedure every morning, making it one of the cruelest and longest forms of torture. One man lived for a total of 17 days before he died. Branding iron. A permanent mark was created on a person's skin when a hot metal stamp was placed on it. This procedure was extremely painful. It served as a kind of discipline and served as a lifelong reminder of what had happened to them and others. Brazen bull. To shock others, by demonstrating how severe the punishment could be, a metal statue styled like a real-sized bull was used to imprison someone within. When the statue heated up with fire underneath, the person inside would experience intense heat and pain while being burned alive. For added realism, there were special pipes to force the victim to breathe and to make the crowd hear the screams. This produced a sound like a bull releasing steam from its nose. Breaking wheel. This technique left the victim hanging high, where birds and bad weather caused their death to be slow and painful. The victim's bones were broken, and their body was twisted around a large wheel. Breast ripper. It was heated and used to tear the skin of the breasts, causing severe discomfort that left marks that would last a lifetime, especially for women. Kangwe, a large, heavy wooden board. A lock around one's neck made it difficult for them to move or eat, and it was a means of publicly humiliating them. This meant that their punishment went beyond simple physical suffering to include social embarrassment. Castor oil. Once forcing someone to consume large amounts of castor oil, which induced vomiting and nausea, they would place the victim in a large barrel the size of a human being and remove them only once the victim confessed. This might even result in the victim being left inside the barrel to drown in their bodily fluids. Choke pear. A deliberately enlarged metal instrument inserted into the mouth or the anus would intentionally stretch the tissue until it was beyond repair. Head crusher. Its name should give you an idea of how terrible the device is. It gradually tightened around the head, producing intense sadness before finally crushing the skull. It was applied as a severe punishment or to compel confessions. Iron chair. An individual would have to spend hours or even days sitting on an iron chair with a sharp armrest and a seat. Keel hauling. A brutal coastal punishment known as keel hauling involved tying a sailor to a rope and dragging him underwater as they passed beneath the ship's keel from one side to the other. It was feared for its brutality. If the victim did not drown or suffer serious injuries from the ship's rusty, pointed wooden body, they would just repeat the process until they were dead. Lingqi. Often referred to as death by 1,000 cuts, this method of execution was employed in China. The condemned person's flesh was systematically severed. Tiny portions were taken until the rib cage was exposed. Hours would pass during which time the person would eventually pass away. The goal was to inflict as much pain and suffering as possible before death. Pendulum. A technique that involved hanging a sharp blade above the victim and lowering it gradually so that with each swing the blade would move like a pendulum and make deeper cuts in the victim each time. Rack. The victim would be made to lie on a wooden rack that was formed like a rectangle and would pull their arms and legs in opposite directions to stretch their body. It was extremely painful and could result in ligaments being torn and dislocated limbs. Its primary purpose was information gathering. Scavenger's daughter. A gadget that compressed the victim's abdomen while forcing them into a crouch, intensifying their pain. It was the reverse of the rack, which put more emphasis on stretching than compression. Pau de arara. A kind of torture in which the victim is hanged by their wrists and ankles from a rod, much like a parrot on its perched. Although it wasn't a method of execution, the victim can occasionally experience persistent joint difficulties as a result. tongue tierer. Ironically, this instrument was frequently used to force people to talk. It grabbed and broke the victim's tongue, producing severe discomfort and stopping the sufferer from speaking. Strappado. Weights may have been added to the body to heighten the effect and pain of the torture, which comprised securing the victim's hands behind their back and lifting them up by a rope fastened to their wrists, usually resulting in a dislocated shoulder. Since it would probably end in death, this sort of torture would usually not endure longer than an hour without a break. White room. A technique in which the victim is housed in an all-white soundproof chamber, void of any windows or other distinguishing characteristics. It was a protracted sort of psychological torture that frequently pushed victims insane. Oubliette dungeon. The term oubliette comes from a French word for forget. This kind of dungeon was created as a deep pit to house forgotten prisoners. Victims would frequently be lowered through a narrow opening, ignored, and endured death without food or drink. Gibbeting human cages. A kind of post-mortem punishment and public execution, in which the victim, often while still alive, was put to death slowly and humiliatingly in front of others by hanging their body in a metal cage in a public place. Spanish tickler. The frightening Spanish tickler was made to shred and tear flesh off the body. It was shaped like a metal claw and was applied to the victim slowly and continuously. At first, it would only tickle, but eventually, it would destroy the skin. Bamboo torture. A bamboo would occasionally be inserted into a person's anus and left there, growing inside the guy at a rapid pace and causing severe discomfort until it emerged on the other side. Flaying alive. This horrifying technique, which involves removing the victim's skin from their body while they are still conscious, was intended to inflict severe, gradual pain that would eventually result in infection or shock-related death. Judas chair. With the victim positioned at the top of the pyramid-shaped seat and ropes used to suspend and lower their body weight onto the pointed apex of the chair, the torture device would gradually tear the victim apart. Iron Maiden. A tall, coffin-shaped room with inside spikes that, when closed, would pierce the person placed inside. Spanish donkey. The subject was made to sit on a wooden object with a steep angle and straddle it. It resembles a donkey that has weights fastened to its feet. This would put additional stress and pain on the body, frequently resulting in serious damage to the spine and legs until the victim's body weight ripped them apart. Crocodile shears. A tool of torture intended to cut off the victim's limbs. The shears, which resembled the jaws of a crocodile due to their heated, sharpened edge, were frequently used on metal workers or as a form of punishment for robbery attempts. Chinese water torture. A technique that involves putting water dews on someone's forehead repeatedly and for a long time. When the continual drip is unbearable over time, this can produce psychological distress, severe anxiety, and even madness. Thumb screw. A device that crushed the digits in severe discomfort by tightening the screws would apply terrible pressure to the thumbs or fingers. It was frequently applied to extract confessions or punish liars and other lawbreakers. Whirligig. A torture device that used centrifugal energy to spin the subject around at high speeds, possibly causing physical injury as well as nausea and disorientation. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like our channel for more enthusiastic content.